Paramedics are incredibly superstitious. Some avoid taking shifts during a full moon. As if I didn't know, I'm an EMT. For generations of EMTs in my family, my parents told me all about EMT folklore. How the full moon is always a very busy night for them. How you can't go on call expecting to sleep or read, because you're sure to get a million calls if you do. Come on, don't get comfortable. After a few years, I didn't think they could tell me anything about EMT that would affect me. There was one story she had kept to herself for fear it would be too disturbing. She was worried I would be afraid to go near the hospital if she told me when I was younger. But I was a lot older the day she revealed this to me, and this is the story she told me. When my mother was a young paramedic, she worked at a hospital nestled in the northern mountain forests. You wonder how much might be hidden in the trees out there, away from the bright lights and safe noise of the city. The hospital my mother worked at back then was, and still is, relatively small. Only having 2 buildings with emergency rooms, its paramedics were expected to serve the large rural areas of the north. My mother found herself spending long, dark nights in an empty mining hospital, alone save for her teammates and the noise of the forest surrounding the small building. For cost reasons, the hospital decided to leave the rest of the facility unused, keeping a small office area for themselves. Although it was well equipped with cots, recliners, a microwave, a refrigerator, and easy access to a private bathroom. The bright light from the extra lamps did nothing to alleviate the feeling that they were disturbing a place that had been dormant for quite some time and probably should have remained that way. Security guards were hired to patrol the area and make sure we could return without fear. The security team walked the building constantly during the day, keeping an eye out for curious explorers and potential squatters. They also patrolled at night in a valiant effort to reassure the paramedics. This practice was roundly vetoed by said paramedics on their first night at the hospital. Well-meaning security guards shined their flashlights into the frightened and irritated faces of the doctors on duty, waking them up and eliciting a series of creative expletives as they expressed their displeasure. Mom was there for months and became familiar with the echoing silence of the empty hallways, the creaking and settling of the old building, despite the minor anxiety that bothered her. Probably a lingering fear that the guards would wake them unexpectedly again. It was nice to feel cared for during the long, dark night shifts. It was, and still is, a grueling job that took a lot of energy from the paramedics stationed in that old building. The deepest hours of the night would turn into a warm, delicate silence, as each doctor took a short nap between shifts, with boots ready, wrapped in their heavy uniform coats, to chase away the environmental anxiety that being on duty instilled in them. They would curl up on different bunks and couches and rest. It was on a night like this that my mother first saw something truly strange. Unable to sleep for fear of missing a call and for the persistent snoring of her partner, she slipped into the bathroom, a small single-seater with the added benefit of a shower stall, a luxury that called to her as she entered and quietly closed the door behind her. She washed her hands and face, wetting her hair lightly before braiding it back against her skull. She turned off the faucet in the sink, stopping the flow of water. She hadn't realized how loud the sound of the water had been, echoing in the small room, until he was gone. She looked in the mirror and jumped out of her skin. A figure was standing right behind her in the reflection, looking over her shoulder, his identity obscured by condensation. She turned around and let out a curse. She assumed one of the other paramedics had crept up on her, either her partner or one of the men from the other ambulance unit who was there with them. But when she turned around, there was no one there. She was confused at first, but soon became irritated. At the moment, she was in no mood for any of that. She left the bathroom, looking around the master bedroom to see which idiot had decided to sneak up on her in the middle of the night. She snorted, They deserved a wake-up call, she decided. One of them had scared her in the middle of the night in her creepy building, and now they were pretending to be asleep to escape his wrath. She started to walk towards her roommate, ready to wake her up with an elbow, when she heard something. The sound of running water stopped her dead in her tracks. She stood there, confused. Hadn't she turned off the tap? She was sure she remembered turning off the tap. She went back into the bathroom and sure enough, hot water sprayed into the sink at full blast and a cloud of steam rose again. "Wow," she said, forgetting about the malicious joke, then leaned over to turn off the tap. She turned the valves hard, trying to find an explanation for the phenomenon. She returned to her bunk and heard it. A small creaking sound, too quiet to wake any of the sleeping paramedics, coming from the bathroom. A second later, the sound of running water rose again. She jumped out of her bunk and carefully glanced around the room just in time to see the water faucet turn on. She walked over to the sink, trying to ignore the figure once again lurking over her shoulder in the mirror's reflection, and turned off the faucet. She sat on her bunk staring at the open bathroom door. Hours later, when the sun rose and marked the end of her shift, her partner woke up to find Mom sitting there, still staring at the empty bathroom, wondering if she hadn't slept. She found it much harder to take a nap after the bathroom incident. She lay awake most nights, watching the flashlight move around the room, listening to the soft snores of her partners. Eventually, the sleep she was losing caught up with her. Even though she worked the night shift, the rest of the world demanded her attention during the day and left her too tired. One dark night, curled up in the cocoon of blankets, she fell into a deep sleep. It had been a long day, trudging through the cold of midwinter, and she fell fast asleep the moment she laid her head down. Finally, the flashlight illuminated the door to the doctor's room. She glanced at the sleeping figures of the paramedics, who remained undisturbed. She wandered around the room, illuminating stray boots, open and face-down books to mark the reader's place, extra snacks taken from the hospital break rooms scattered around the space. One of the radios beeped very low, too low to wake the paramedics. The volume was set too low, an oversight the sleeping doctors couldn't remedy when the beam of their flashlight fell on the radio. A voice spoke. "Wake up." It seemed to be mere inches from her ear. Fear shook her, quickly turning to anger as she sat up, ready to speak her mind to the other doctor. The other 3 occupants of the room lay in their bunks, still fast asleep. Mom looked around for a moment, trying to understand what had woken her, but all was silent. A few moments later, the radio crackled. 52. The operator asked quietly. Mom's stomach lurched as she got out of bed and made her way to the walkie-talkie. 52 here, she replied. Soon after that night, the guards and paramedics were laughing and chatting together in a bar not far from the old hospital, enjoying the joy of a shared afternoon off. My mother said to the guards, "Thank you for letting us sleep. It was comforting to see you patrolling the rest of the building." The guards looked perplexed. "What are you talking about?" one asked. My mother frowned. "I mean your patrols. How come you didn't wake us up again when you did your rounds?" "Oh, we didn't do any more rounds," the younger of the 2 guards said. "We noticed you guys occupied that wing. We just checked all the other doors and searched the place. Most nights, we didn't even go into the building, let alone check the hallways. My mother insisted. We saw a flashlight every night, all night, going from room to room and checking everything. Who else would dare wander around a stupid, empty building every night?" The older guard breathed a sigh of relief and relaxed, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, that," he said, taking a sip from his glass. "It's just the doctor." "What doctor?" When that hospital was active long ago, it served almost only the mine and occasionally the surrounding towns. The staff, they had worked every day, sometimes around the clock. Just a few nurses, a few housekeepers, and at least one doctor. He would kick out the nurses at night and make the rounds himself. All he carried with him was an old flashlight, which he would sneak through the halls with, looking at patients' charts and recording their vital signs by the light of his lamp. He died right there on his gurney, dying peacefully in his sleep. But he continued to be on duty, never clocking out. My mother was silent, considering the story. I mean, the security guard finally said, "At least he's trying to help." I asked my mother if she saw the doctor again, and she said no, the building was eventually abandoned, but she wanted to tell you about him so I wouldn't be surprised on my first night shift. I forgot about Mom and the doctor as the afternoon turned into night. My shift was uneventful, with only a few calls early on, and I was lucky to get a few hours of sleep. I wasn't thinking about ghosts as the moon rose in the sky, crossing the shiny wooden floor of the room I was dozing in. But I did hear something that, as a light sleeper, woke me up in the wee hours of the morning. A squeaking sound, like work boots sliding across a wooden floor. As I regained consciousness, I heard a voice, a raspy male voice, right in my ear.
"Wake up."
I shot my eyes open and bolted upright in bed, my roommate snoring in the next room, the only other sign of life in the deserted building. I was about to go back to bed when I heard the tones, which were too softly played from a mobile radio in my partner's room. We had to answer a call. I woke my partner up, laced up my boots, and tried to understand what I had just experienced as we ran to the emergency room. I've had a few years to think about it, and I think the answer has always been clear. Paramedics are superstitious, and now I am too.